Welcome back to History Class with Dr. W and our continuing discussion of the Gilded Age and Progressive Era. In the last few lectures, we've talked about the industrialization of the age, the rise of big business, and some of the captains of industry who headed those businesses. But the wealth of those so-called robber barons was built on the backs of common workers who toiled in awful conditions and long hours. And so in this lecture, and the ones to follow, we'll turn to discussing average Americans and the working conditions that they endured through much of the Gilded Age. Americans today would hardly recognize the conditions that most workers endured during the Gilded Age. And in fact, many of the benefits that workers today enjoy arose out of the organization of labor, strikes and struggles of organized labor during this period. But at that time, working conditions across the board tended to be miserable and dangerous. Women and children working in the textile mills would be covered with little fragments of cotton by the end of the day, and would inhale the stuff all day long. This is long before carpal tunnel syndrome was a known entity, and the factories would have workers carry out the same tasks for hours on end, day after day. Women worked, children worked, and if you suffered an injury, as I've mentioned under the social Darwinist way of thinking, there was essentially nothing for you. The brakemen on trains in the railroads had to climb up onto the roof of each car and turn a crank, an extremely dangerous process. Loggers on the rivers had to unclog enormous log jams, and it wasn't uncommon at all for someone to slip off the log, fall down into the water, and get trapped beneath the massive piles of logs. Women and men, often the Chinese immigrants, working in the laundries, suffered horrible conditions. Working all day long, often sometimes into the next day, with hands and arms submerged in dirty, soapy water, causing swelling and ulcers. The investigative journalist Dorothy Richardson, in The Long Day, published in 1905, spent time working a variety of jobs, but to her the worst was the laundry. In one part, she described a woman who lost her hand in one of the presses. The woman said, "I was clean done out one Saturday night, and I just couldn't see no more. And the first thing I knew, woohoo! And that hand went right straight clean into the rollers. And I was just tired, that's all." The coal mines were the most notorious and dangerous and unhealthy places to work, often employing young boys known as breaker boys between the ages of 10 and 15, who could more easily crawl and walk into the narrow tunnels down deep in the mines. Some of those are pictured here, and coal miners in general were known and said to almost never see the light of day because they would go down into the tunnels when it was still dark in the morning, and they would come up after dark at night. In the tunnels, they would inhale dust and coal all day long. Oftentimes, when they were working on a vein of coal in the mine, it was only a few feet tall, and they had to crawl in order to dig it out. They weren't allowed or able to stand all the way upright. This is to say nothing of the collapse of mine shafts or flooding, which would frequently kill the men who were in the tunnels at that time, and were not uncommon during that time. So what would happen to these men or boys who were injured or even killed in the workplace? Well, as I've mentioned, under the social Darwinist way of thinking, there was no workman's compensation, there was virtually nothing done, and it was on the company itself to take some responsibility and ownership if an accident occurred. And these mining companies were notorious for almost never allowing for any benefits to the workers who were injured or to their families if they were killed. Here are some of the excerpts from one mine in Colorado from the coroner's reports. This mining company had 90 deaths over a 10-year period. Only one of those deaths did the company accept any blame and pay out any benefits to the family. Here are some of the quotes from those coroner's reports. Fall of rock due to his own negligence. Broken neck, accident unavoidable. Death by negligence on his own part and no other. Died by a car running over him and his own carelessness. And so in none of these cases did the businesses take any responsibility for the damage, injuries, and death that was caused. And yet the people worked. They had to